Take one more step toward my daughter, and I'll make sure you never work in a hospital again. Graham Vale did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The billionaire stood in the center of Alder Crest Medical Center's emergency department in a rain-darkened charcoal suit, surrounded by doctors, administrators, and security officers who all seemed to understand that when Graham Vale spoke, people moved. Across from him stood Nurse Evelyn Mercer, 34 years old, navy blue scrubs, dark hair pulled into a loose knot. No jewelry except a cheap black watch, a hospital badge clipped above her heart, and blood on both hands. Not her blood, his daughter's. Mr. Vale, Evie said quietly, your daughter is bleeding internally. Dr. Nathan Cross, chief of trauma, stiffened beside the bed. We've already discussed this, he snapped. Her fast exam was inconclusive. Her pressure is stable. For now. Cross turned toward her with open irritation. You are a nurse, Ms. Mercer. I am the attending trauma surgeon. Evie's eyes never left the patient. 26-year-old Clare Vale lay beneath a white hospital blanket, pale and trembling after the helicopter accident that had brought her into Alder Crest 40 minutes earlier. The visible injuries looked frightening but manageable. A fractured wrist, a deep cut along her temple, bruising across her ribs. But Evie wasn't watching the injuries everyone could see. She was watching Clare's breathing. 28 breaths per minute. Too fast. The slight tightening around her mouth. The growing pallor beneath her skin. And the monitor. Heart rate 118. Then 121. Then 124. Something was wrong. Something the machines had not screamed loudly enough for anyone else to hear. Graham stepped between Evie and the bed. My daughter has the best trauma surgeon in this state. Evie finally looked at him. Then he should know she's compensating. The room changed. It was subtle. A resident stopped writing. A nurse near the medication cart lowered her eyes. Dr. Cross's jaw tightened. Nobody spoke to Graham Vale that way. More importantly, nobody contradicted Nathan Cross in his own trauma bay. You're done, Cross said. Evie ignored him. Her attention dropped to Clare's abdomen. There. A tiny movement. Clare's hand drifting instinctively toward the left side beneath her ribs. Evie stepped forward. Graham blocked her. I said don't touch her. Mr. Vale, do you know who I am? Evie's expression did not change. I know who she is. She nodded toward Clare. My patient. For the first time, genuine anger crossed Graham Vale's face. The CEO of Alder Crest, Martin Keller, hurried into the trauma bay with 2 security officers behind him. Mr. Vale, I apologize. I was told there was an incident. There is. Graham pointed directly at Evie. This nurse is refusing the attending physician's orders. Keller looked at Evie, and something almost like disappointment crossed his face. Evelyn. Her pulse has climbed 26 beats since arrival, Evie said. Her skin is cooling, her respiratory rate is increasing, and she's guarding her upper left quadrant. We need another scan now. Cross laughed once. Coldly. She needs to stop playing doctor. Evie said nothing. That silence seemed to infuriate him more. Graham looked at Keller. I've donated $80 million to this hospital. Nobody moved. I will not stand here while an insubordinate nurse experiments on my daughter. Claire suddenly whispered from the bed. Dad, Evie turned. Claire's lips had lost their color. The monitor changed. Evie moved toward her. Graham grabbed her wrist. Don't. Evie looked down at his hand, then back at his face. Something in her eyes made him release her. Not fear, not anger, something calmer, older, as if powerful men shouting orders were nowhere near the worst thing she had survived. But Graham Vale could not know that. Not yet. Security, he said. The officer stepped forward. Remove her. Keller hesitated. Graham, I said remove her. Evie glanced at Clare. Her breathing had become shallow. Her fingers were trembling. Then Evie looked at the monitor once more and understood exactly what was about to happen. She unclipped her hospital badge herself, placed it carefully on the stainless steel counter. Graham stared at her. That's right, he said. You're finished here. Evie met his eyes. You can fire me in 30 seconds. What? Give me 30 seconds with your daughter. Cross scoffed. Absolutely not. Graham's face hardened. Fire her now. Keller swallowed. Evelyn Mercer, effective immediately. You are suspended pending termination. Security will escort you from the building. Evie did not argue. She did not plead. She simply looked past all of them at Clare. Then she said 5 words so quietly that everyone had to listen. She has less than 5 minutes. Graham almost laughed. Then Claire Vale's monitor screamed. Her blood pressure collapsed. Her eyes rolled backward, and her heart rate shot past 140. Every doctor in the room turned toward the bed. Evie did not. She was already moving. 3 hours before Graham Vale ordered her fired, Evelyn Mercer had been standing alone in a supply room counting trauma dressings. Nobody noticed her there. That was exactly how Evie preferred it. Alder Crest Medical Center woke differently from other hospitals. At 5:17 in the morning, the corridors belonged to exhausted night nurses, humming vending machines, half-empty coffee cups, and cleaning carts moving beneath fluorescent lights. By 8, the building would fill with surgeons, administrators, families, and expensive shoes. Evie liked the hour before all of that. Quiet made people honest. She had worked the night shift at Alder Crest for 11 months, long enough for everyone to recognize her face and almost nobody to know anything about her. To the staff, Evelyn Mercer was simply the quiet trauma nurse from somewhere out west. No husband mentioned. No children. No social media. No stories about nursing school. When coworkers complained about difficult shifts, Evie listened. When they asked about her past, she smiled politely and changed the subject. Eventually, people stopped asking. That suited her perfectly. Mercer. Charge nurse Denise Holloway appeared in the doorway holding a clipboard. You're still here. Evie glanced at the clock. 5:19. My shift ends at 6. You finished your charts 20 minutes ago. Supply inventory was short. Denise stared at the shelves. You know we employ people to do that. Evie placed another compression dressing into the cabinet. They missed 12. Denise sighed. You ever get tired of fixing things nobody asked you to fix? Evie paused. For the smallest fraction of a second, something changed behind her eyes. Yes. Then she closed the cabinet. Denise did not notice the answer. Most people didn't notice much about Evelyn Mercer. They didn't notice that she always chose the chair facing the emergency department entrance. They didn't notice that whenever a helicopter approached the rooftop helipad, her head tilted slightly before anyone else heard the rotor blades. They didn't notice how quickly she identified exits in unfamiliar rooms, or that she never stood with her back to an open doorway. People saw habits. They did not see where habits came from. At 5:43, an ambulance delivered a construction worker who had fallen 2 stories. The ER changed instantly. Evie changed with it. Not dramatically. That was what made it strange. Everyone else moved faster. Evie seemed to move slower. Yet somehow she was always there first. Gloves on. Airway cart open. Blood tubing ready. Trauma scissors already in her hand before Dr. Cross requested them. Pressure 84/50. 2 large-bore IVs. Already placed, Evie said. Cross glanced down. Both lines were running. He frowned. When did you? 30 seconds ago. The patient groaned. Evie leaned close. You're at Alder Crest. My name is Evie. Stay with my voice. His frightened eyes found hers. Something about her tone worked. Not softness exactly. Certainty. The kind that made panic feel temporarily unnecessary. 20 minutes later, the patient was stable enough for imaging. Dr. Cross removed his gloves. Good work. Evie was already cleaning blood from the floor. He walked away before noticing. At 6:02, Denise found her near the lockers. Go home, Mercer. Evie smiled faintly. That's the plan. She opened her locker. Inside were almost no personal belongings. A spare scrub top, running shoes, a paperback novel, and beneath them, hidden inside an old canvas pouch, something metallic caught the fluorescent light. Evie immediately covered it with her hand. A flight badge, worn, scratched, unused for years. Her thumb rested against it for 1 second. Then came a sound from somewhere above the hospital. Rotor blades. Evie froze, not visibly enough for anyone passing behind her to notice. But her fingers stopped moving. The rhythm grew louder. Heavy. For blades. Evie closed her eyes. For one impossible second, the locker room disappeared. Heat. Smoke. Metal screaming against earth. Someone shouting through a headset. Nightingale. We're going down. Her eyes opened. She shoved the badge beneath the canvas pouch and slammed the locker shut. The helicopter overhead was civilian. Nothing more. Evie took one slow breath. Then another. She had come to Alder Crest because nobody here knew that name. Nobody called her captain. Nobody saluted her. Nobody looked at her and remembered fire. Here she could simply be Nurse Mercer. She could start IVs, change dressings, hold frightened hands. Keep people alive beneath clean white lights. Ordinary work. Safe work. That was all she wanted. Then the emergency doors burst open. Two paramedics rushed through with a young woman strapped to a stretcher. Helicopter accident. 26-year-old female. Evie turned. Behind the stretcher came 6 people in expensive clothes. At their center walked a tall man in a rain-darkened charcoal suit. Denise went pale. Oh God. Evie looked at her. What? Denise lowered her voice. That's Graham Vale. Evie had heard the name. Everyone had. Billionaire. Donor. A man whose money had built half the cardiac wing. Denise grabbed Evie's arm. Your shift is over. Go home. Trust me. You do not want anything to do with this family. Evie looked past her. The woman on the stretcher suddenly pressed a trembling hand beneath her left ribs. A tiny movement. Almost invisible. Evie's expression changed. She took her bag off her shoulder, placed it back inside the locker, and closed the door. I think, she said quietly, I'm staying a little longer. Money did not make Graham Vale loud. It made everyone around him quiet. The moment he entered Aldercrest's emergency department, conversations shortened, backs straightened, and people who had spent 12-hour shifts ignoring hospital administrators suddenly remembered how to smile. Evie noticed all of it. She also noticed Clare Vale's fingers were still pressed beneath her left ribs. Trauma Bay 1, Dr. Nathan Cross ordered. Let's move. The stretcher disappeared through the double doors. Graham followed. So did Martin Keller, Aldercrest CEO, who had somehow arrived from the executive floor in less than 4 minutes. Mr. Vale, Keller said, breathless but smiling. We have our best team here. I don't want your best team. Graham looked through the glass toward his daughter. I want the team that keeps her alive. Keller's smile tightened. Of course. Evie walked past them carrying blood draw supplies. Graham glanced at her badge. Nurse. She stopped. My daughter gets whatever she needs. Yes, sir. Private room. Specialists. Whatever equipment Cross requests. Evie looked through the glass. Claire was shivering now. What she needs first is to stay in trauma. Graham stared at her. Keller immediately stepped closer. Evelyn, Mr. Vale is understandably concerned. So am I. For half a second, nobody spoke. Then Evie entered the bay. Graham watched her go. He was not accustomed to being dismissed. Inside, Dr. Cross was examining Claire's abdomen. Pain. Mostly my wrist. Any dizziness? A little. Cross looked at the monitor. Blood pressure 112/72. Good. Evie did not think it was good. Claire had arrived at 126/80. Her pressure was falling. Not dramatically. Not yet. Evie attached another lead. Claire looked at her. Am I okay? We're taking care of you. It was not an answer. Claire seemed to understand that. Cross glanced at the ultrasound images. No obvious free fluid. Can we repeat the fast? Evie asked. Cross looked up. Why? Her pulse is climbing. She's frightened. Her pressure is falling. She was in an accident. Evie's eyes moved to Claire's abdomen. She's guarding. Cross exhaled through his nose. Mercer, I know what splenic trauma looks like. Evie held his gaze for 1 second. I know. Something about the way she said it bothered him. Not challenging. Not sarcastic. Certain. Cross turned away. We'll observe. Outside the bay, Graham was already on his phone. Cancel Zurich. Move the board call to tomorrow. He listened. No. I don't care what it costs. He ended the call and immediately made another. People moved around him as if he carried his own gravity. A resident whispered to Evie. You know he basically owns this place, right? Evie checked Claire's pulse manually. No, the resident blinked. No. He doesn't own the patient. Claire heard that. Despite the pain, the corner of her mouth moved. Then Graham entered. What did she say? Nothing, Claire murmured. Graham looked at Cross. Results. Initial imaging is reassuring. We're monitoring her. Graham nodded. Good. Evie watched Claire's face. Paler. A faint sheen of sweat had appeared above her lip. Heart rate 109. Then 113. Evie reached for Claire's hand. Cold. Too cold. Claire, does your shoulder hurt? Claire frowned. My shoulder. Left shoulder. A pause. Actually, yes. Evie's eyes sharpened. Cross heard it. So what? She impacted on that side. Evie turned toward him. Care's sign. His expression hardened. I know what Care's sign is. Then repeat the scan. Graham stepped between them. What exactly are you suggesting? Bleeding around the spleen can irritate the diaphragm and refer pain into the shoulder. Cross's face reddened. That is enough. Graham looked from Cross to Evie. Is my daughter bleeding internally? Cross answered first. There is no evidence of significant internal hemorrhage. Evie remained silent. Graham noticed. You disagree? Keller appeared in the doorway. Evie could feel every eye in the room waiting for the safe answer. She gave the truthful one. Yes. The word landed harder than a shout. Cross stared at her. Keller's face went pale, and Graham Vale slowly stepped closer. You are telling me the chief of trauma is wrong? I'm telling you your daughter is changing. I hired Nathan Cross because he is one of the best surgeons in the country. Evie looked past him at Claire. Heart rate 118. I'm not questioning his resume. Graham's voice dropped. Then perhaps you should remember yours. Claire whispered something. Nobody heard her except Evie. Cold. Evie immediately pulled another blanket over her. Graham caught her wrist. I think you've done enough. Evie looked at his hand, then at him. Behind Graham, the monitor climbed again. Evie's voice remained almost unnaturally calm. Mr. Vale, you can dislike me after your daughter is stable. His grip tightened. And until then, Evie looked directly into his eyes. Until then, get out of my way. Take your hand off her. Evie did not say it loudly. That was what made Graham Vale release her wrist. For several seconds, nobody inside Trauma Bay 1 moved. Dr. Nathan Cross stared at Evie as if she had forgotten the hierarchy of the room. Martin Keller looked horrified. Two residents suddenly became fascinated with their charts. Graham's expression hardened. Excuse me. Your daughter needs another scan. I asked what you just said to me, and I answered the problem that matters. Claire shifted weakly beneath the blanket. Dad? Graham turned immediately. Evie used the moment to check Claire's abdomen again. The muscles beneath her left ribs tightened at the slightest pressure. Guarding. Her skin was colder. Pulse 124. Evie had seen this progression before. Not here. Somewhere hotter. Louder. Somewhere blood soaked into sand instead of white hospital sheets. She pushed the memory away. Dr. Cross. Cross stepped toward her. That's enough, Mercer. Her shock index is worsening. I can read a monitor. Then read the patient. Silence. Cross's face changed. You want to challenge me? Do it somewhere else. This isn't about you. That hurt more. Everyone saw it. Cross pulled off his gloves. You have been here 11 months. I have been practicing trauma surgery for 17 years. Evie nodded. Then 17 years should tell you we're running out of time. Graham stepped between them. My daughter is not going to become the battlefield for some nurse's ego. Evie looked at him. No. She's becoming the casualty of yours. Keller inhaled sharply. Evelyn. There it was. The moment everyone knew could not be taken back. Graham Vale slowly turned toward the CEO. Who is she? Keller swallowed. An ER nurse. That isn't what I asked. Evie returned to Claire's bedside. Claire's eyelids fluttered. Stay with me. I'm tired. I know. My shoulder hurts. I know. Claire looked frightened now. Evie squeezed her hand. Don't close your eyes. Across the room, Graham's voice became colder. I want her removed from my daughter's care. Cross answered immediately. Agreed. Keller nodded. Evelyn, step away. Evie did not. Repeat the fast. No, Cross said. Order a CT. She isn't unstable enough to justify rushing. She's becoming unstable in front of you. Cross pointed toward the door. Out. Evie looked at the ultrasound machine. Then Claire. Then the monitor. Her decision took less than a second. Evie pulled the ultrasound toward the bed. Cross grabbed it. What the hell are you doing? Confirming the bleed. You do not have authorization. I have a deteriorating patient. Graham's voice exploded across the bay. Stop. Everyone froze. He walked directly toward Evie. You were told not to touch my daughter. She needs treatment. She has a surgeon. She needs someone willing to see what's happening. Graham stared at her with the disbelief of a man who had built an empire by making resistance expensive. You think you know more than everyone in this room. No, then what makes you so certain? For the first time, Evie hesitated. Her eyes moved toward Claire. For one brief instant, the fluorescent lights seemed to disappear. Rotor wash. Burning fuel. A red light inside a shaking aircraft. A young soldier screaming that he could not feel his legs. Evie blinked. Alder Crest returned. I've seen this before. Cross laughed bitterly. Where? Nursing school. Evie looked at him. No, nothing more. But something in her voice made the oldest nurse in the room stop breathing for a second. Graham did not notice. He was finished listening. Keller. The CEO stepped forward. Yes, I gave this hospital $80 million because you promised me standards. We have standards. Then enforce them. Claire suddenly gasped. Her hand tightened around Evie's fingers. Evie, I'm here. Something's wrong. Evie looked at Cross. Last chance. Cross's jaw clenched. Step away from the patient. Evie stayed exactly where she was. Graham pointed at her. Fire her. Keller stared at him. Graham, now. Security appeared beyond the glass doors. Evie looked down at Claire. Then she slowly reached for the badge clipped above her heart. She had spent 11 months becoming invisible. 11 months hiding everything she had once been. And now she was about to lose the ordinary life she had built because she refused to watch another person bleed while powerful men argued about authority. Evie unclipped the badge. But before she could place it down, Claire whispered 3 words. My stomach hurts. The monitor jumped to 133. Evie's eyes locked on the numbers. And suddenly she knew. They had minutes. You're fired. Martin Keller's voice was barely audible beneath the alarms. Evie looked at the hospital badge in her hand. 11 months of ordinary life reduced to a piece of plastic and a clipped photograph. She placed it on the stainless steel counter. Graham Vale watched her do it without blinking. Security will escort you out. Evie nodded once. Then she looked at Claire. Repeat the ultrasound. Dr. Cross stared at her. You no longer work here. I know. Then leave. Evie's eyes remained on Claire. She's bleeding. Graham stepped closer. You have been dismissed, Ms. Mercer. Evie finally turned toward him. You can hate me when she wakes up. The billionaire's face tightened. Get her out. One security officer reached for Evie's arm. Then Claire made a sound. Small. Almost nothing. A broken breath escaping between pale lips. Evie turned instantly. The monitor screamed. Blood pressure 78/44. Heart rate 146. Claire's eyes rolled backward. Claire. Graham lunged toward the bed. Cross shoved past him. Everyone back. Get me 2 units uncross-matched blood. The room exploded. Residents rushed toward the cabinets. A nurse reached for oxygen. Someone called the blood bank. Cross pressed his fingers against Claire's neck. Pulse is thready. Pressure 72. Hang fluids. Evie stood near the doorway. Nobody was looking at her anymore. Exactly 3 minutes earlier, everyone in the room had been arguing about whether she belonged there. Now Claire Vale was dying. And suddenly nobody cared about hierarchy. Fast machine. Cross shouted. The ultrasound was pushed toward him. He dragged the probe across Claire's abdomen. His expression changed. A black pocket appeared on the screen. Then another. Free fluid. Blood. Cross went pale. Damn it. Graham saw his face. What? Cross did not answer. What does that mean? She's bleeding internally. The word struck Graham harder than any accusation Evie could have made. His eyes moved toward her. Evie said nothing. There was no satisfaction on her face. No triumph. That frightened him more. Or now. Cross ordered. Claire suddenly convulsed. The monitor changed again. Pressure 60. We're losing her. Cross looked around. Where's anesthesia? 2 minutes out. We don't have 2 minutes. Evie heard those words. Something inside her shifted. Not emotionally. Mechanically. Like a locked door opening. She stepped forward. The security officer blocked her. You need to leave. Move. His hand tightened around her arm. Evie looked at it. Move. He did. Later, he would not understand why. Cross saw her approaching. Mercer, stay back. Evie ignored him. She looked at Claire's abdomen, monitor, pupils, skin. 3 seconds. That was all she needed. She's crashing from hemorrhagic shock. We know that. No. You're treating the numbers. Cross stared at her. Evie pointed toward Claire's left side. Her spleen has ruptured. She's bleeding faster than you can replace it. You cannot know that. I do. How? Evie did not answer. Claire's monitor screamed again. Heart rate 154. Then suddenly, Cross looked up. That drop was worse. Much worse. Claire. No response. Graham grabbed his daughter's hand. Claire, look at me. Nothing. Claire. Evie moved to the bedside. Cross blocked her. You are no longer authorized to touch this patient. Evie's voice dropped. Then decide whether you want an authorized death or an unauthorized survival. Cross froze. Get a rapid infuser. Evie ordered. Nobody moved. She looked at the resident. Now. He moved. Activate massive transfusion protocol. A nurse reached for the phone. Keep her warm. Calcium after the 4th unit. Stop drowning her in crystalloids. Cross stared at Evie. Those instructions were coming too quickly, too precisely. Not like something remembered from a textbook. Like something remembered from experience. A lot of experience. Where did you learn trauma resuscitation? He asked. Evie's hands stopped for half a second. Somewhere far behind her eyes, red emergency lights flashed inside a Black Hawk filled with smoke. Not here. Claire stopped breathing. Graham made a sound Evie would remember for years. Not the voice of a billionaire. The voice of a father. Please. One word. All his power was gone. Evie looked at him, then at the badge lying on the counter. She had already lost her job. What she did next could cost her license. Maybe more. Evie pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. Dr. Cross. He stared at her. If you want her alive, you follow me now. For the first time that morning, Nathan Cross did not argue. He stepped aside, and the woman they had just fired took control of the room. Don't let her heart stop. Evie Mercer said it without raising her voice. The room obeyed. The rapid infuser roared to life. Warm blood raced through Clare veils, for while Dr. Cross stood opposite Evie, watching the nurse he had ordered out of his trauma bay direct his team with a precision that made argument suddenly feel dangerous. Pressure 58/36. Second unit in. Calcium ready. Give it. Evie's hands moved over Clare with frightening efficiency. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Cross. She needs the ore. I know. No. She needs it now. Anesthesia is coming. She won't survive waiting for them here. Cross looked at the monitor. Then at Evie. How long? Evie checked Claire's pupils. Maybe 3 minutes before arrest. Graham Vale stood against the wall. Nobody had told him to move there. He simply had. 5 minutes earlier, people had rearranged rooms when he entered them. Now nobody looked at him. Not even his own hospital CEO. Claire, Evie said, leaning close. Stay with me. No response. Evie pressed harder against Claire's left upper abdomen. The monitor changed. She's losing volume faster. Cross nodded toward the doors. Move. The trauma team unlocked the stretcher. They started running. Evie ran with them. Keller caught her at the doorway. Evelyn, legally you're suspended. She kept moving. Then legally you can stop me. Keller released her. The elevator doors opened. Inside, Claire's pressure dropped again. 48 systolic. The resident beside Evie panicked. We're losing the pulse. Evie reached beneath Claire's jaw. Still there. I can't feel it. Because you're shaking. The resident looked at his own hands. He was. Evie took his wrist and placed 2 fingers correctly. Here. His eyes widened. A pulse. Weak, but present. The elevator doors opened onto surgery. Cross stared at Evie as they rushed down the corridor. Mercer. What? Where did you learn to work like this? Evie did not answer. They entered the operating suite. Under the brighter lights, a scrub nurse cut away Claire's gown. Evie reached across to help. Her sleeve caught against the edge of the stretcher. Fabric pulled upward. 3 inches. That was enough. A thick pale scar crossed Evie's forearm. Beside it were faded black numbers. 34 degrees, 12 minutes, 17 seconds north. A second line disappeared beneath her sleeve. Dr. Cross saw them. So did an older anesthesiologist named Samuel Reed. Reed stopped. Those were not decorative coordinates. He knew that immediately. Evelyn. She pulled her sleeve down. Not now. Something in her voice ended the question. Claire's monitor screamed. V-fib. Defibrillator. Evie was already reaching. Charged to 200. Cross stared at her. Clear. Claire's body jumped. Nothing. Again. Charging. Clear. Shock. The rhythm trembled across the screen. Then, a beat. Another. Weak. Irregular. But alive. Graham stood outside the glass doors watching his daughter's heart return. His knees nearly gave out. Inside, Cross exhaled. Evie didn't. Get her open. Cross moved. This time, he gave no argument. Minutes later, blood flooded the suction canister. Splenic rupture, Cross said. Exactly where Evie had said it would be. He looked across the table. But she was already stepping away. Claire was alive. That was enough. Evie removed her gloves. For the first time, her hands trembled. Only once. Then stopped. She walked into the corridor. Graham was waiting. He looked smaller somehow. What are you? Evie stared at him. A nurse. No, he glanced through the glass at Claire. No nurse does what you just did. Evie said nothing. Then a sound rolled across the hospital. Low at first. Heavy. Rhythmic. Rotor blades. Evie froze. Everyone else looked toward the windows. The sound grew until the glass began to vibrate. Keller hurried toward the corridor. What the hell is that? A security officer touched his radio. His face changed. Sir, what? There's a military helicopter requesting immediate clearance for the helipad. Cross stepped out of surgery. A military helicopter? The officer swallowed. Black Hawk. Evie's face lost its color. Outside, the massive aircraft descended toward Alder Crest. Rotor wash exploded across the rooftop. And beneath Evie's sleeve, her fingers slowly closed over the faded coordinates on her arm. For the first time all morning, she looked afraid. Not of Graham Vale. Not of losing her job. Of being recognized. The Black Hawk touched down like the hospital roof belonged to it. Rotor wash hammered the helipad, sending rainwater across the concrete in silver sheets. Through the corridor windows, doctors and nurses stopped moving. Nobody at Alder Crest had requested military transport. Nobody understood why it was there. Evie did. Or at least she was beginning to. Mercer. Dr. Cross stood behind her. Evie kept staring through the glass. Who are they? I don't know. It was the first lie Cross had heard her tell. The Black Hawk's side door opened. A crew chief jumped onto the roof, followed by a tall pilot wearing a dark flight suit. He removed his helmet as he crossed beneath the spinning blades. Major Daniel Reyes. Evie stopped breathing. 8 years disappeared in 1 second. Smoke. Gunfire. A cockpit filling with warning alarms. Reyes screaming through the intercom. Nightingale brace. Then impact. Evie stepped backward. No, Cross heard her. What? Nothing. But it was not nothing. Reyes entered the hospital with 2 military personnel behind him. Security tried to intercept them. Sir, this is a restricted, Captain Evelyn Mercer. The guard stopped. Reyes's voice carried down the corridor. I need Captain Evelyn Mercer. Silence spread outward. Nurses looked at one another. Keller frowned. We don't have a Captain Mercer. Reyes looked directly at him. Yes, you do. Graham Vale stepped out from beside the surgical waiting area. My daughter is in surgery. Why is the military here? Reyes barely glanced at him. I'm looking for Evelyn Mercer. Keller shook his head. We have a nurse by that name. Reyes went completely still. A nurse. Evie closed her eyes. There was nowhere left to disappear. She stepped around the corner. Daniel. Reyes turned. Everything in his face changed. For a moment, the decorated Black Hawk pilot looked incapable of speech. He stared at Evie's navy scrubs. At the blood on them. At the woman he had spent 8 years believing he would probably never see again. Ma'am. Evie's voice was quiet. Don't. But Reyes was already moving. He crossed the corridor. Stopped 6 feet in front of her. Straightened. Then raised his right hand. A perfect salute. The entire hallway froze. Cross stared. Keller's mouth opened. The security officers looked at each other. Graham Vale simply watched. Evie did not return the salute. Daniel. His hand remained there. You saved my life. Put your hand down. You saved all of us. Her jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. Not to me. Reyes lowered his hand. His eyes dropped toward her sleeve. He had seen the coordinates before. He knew exactly what they marked. Cross finally found his voice. Major. Reyes turned. Doctor. You called her Captain. Evie looked at Cross. A warning. Reyes saw it. He understood immediately. You didn't tell them? Tell us what? Keller asked. Evie exhaled slowly. This isn't the place. Graham stepped forward. I think it is. Evie looked at him. His arrogance had returned, but something underneath it had changed. Uncertainty. You just took control of my daughter's resuscitation after being fired, he said. Now a Black Hawk lands on my hospital, and its pilot salutes you. Reyes's expression hardened. You fired her? Nobody answered. Reyes looked at Keller. Then Cross. Then Graham. You fired Captain Mercer? Graham lifted his chin. She endangered my daughter. Cross spoke before Evie could. No, everyone turned. Cross swallowed. She saved her. Graham's eyes narrowed. Cross continued. Ruptured spleen. Massive hemorrhage. Mercer identified it before any of us. Reyes gave a humorless smile. Of course she did. What is that supposed to mean? Graham asked. Reyes looked at Evie. She shook her head once. Please. He stopped. For now. Then Graham noticed something attached to Reyes's flight bag. A small metal tag. A name engraved into its surface. Vale stepped closer. His face changed. Where did you get that? Reyes looked down. The tag carried a name. Lieutenant Michael Vale. Evie's eyes closed. Graham went pale. My brother. The corridor became absolutely silent. Graham looked from the tag to Reyes, then to Evie. You knew Michael? Evie said nothing. Graham stepped closer. My brother died in a helicopter crash 8 years ago. Reyes's jaw tightened. It wasn't a crash. Graham stared at him. What? Reyes looked toward Evie. This time, she could not stop what was coming. He was shot down. Graham's face emptied. And she was there? Reyes looked at the quiet nurse Graham Vale had ordered fired less than an hour earlier. Then he answered. She was the last person holding your brother alive. He didn't die alone. Evie's voice was so quiet Graham Vale almost missed it. The billionaire stood motionless in the surgical corridor, staring at the metal tag hanging from Major Daniel Reyes's flight bag. Lieutenant Michael Vale. 8 years. For 8 years, Graham had known only what the official report allowed him to know. Aircraft lost during operations. Hostile territory. For casualties. Classified circumstances. No details. No final words. No answer to the question that had followed him into every silent room since the folded flag was placed into his mother's hands. Was Michael afraid? Graham looked at Evie. You were there? She nodded. Reyes answered for her. She was our flight trauma nurse. Cross frowned. Flight nurse. Reyes looked at him. Captain Evelyn Mercer. Army Medical Corps. Attached to a special medevac element. Evie's jaw tightened. Daniel. They deserve to know. No. You spent 8 years making sure nobody knew. That was the point. Graham stepped closer. What happened to my brother? Evie looked toward the operating room doors. Claire was still inside. Still alive. Because Evie had refused to leave. That seemed to make the next words harder. Our aircraft was redirected during an extraction, she said. Your brother's team had taken casualties. Reyes stared at the floor. We went in when we weren't supposed to. Why? Because they were still alive. The corridor disappeared behind Evie's eyes. Night. Mountains. Tracer fire cutting through darkness. The Black Hawk banking violently as rounds struck the fuselage. Michael Vale on the floor with blood soaking through his uniform. Then the warning tone. Engine failure. Reyes fighting the controls. Impact. Fire. Screaming. I woke up upside down, Reyes said. Couldn't feel my left leg. Fuel was leaking everywhere. He looked at Evie. She was already moving. Evie said nothing. She pulled me out. Reyes pointed toward the scar hidden beneath her sleeve. Burned her arm doing it. Cross looked at the coordinates again. Now he understood. Reyes continued. She went back inside. Graham's face tightened. For Michael. For everyone. 1 crew chief. 2 wounded soldiers. Then another. Evie entered the burning aircraft again and again while ammunition cooked in the wreckage and rescue was still minutes away. 6 people came out alive. Michael was the last. He had internal injuries, Evie said. Graham swallowed. Could you save him? Silence. No, the answer broke something in him. Evie stepped closer. But I tried. Graham looked away. He knew he was dying? Evie could have lied. She didn't. Yes. Graham closed his eyes. Was he afraid? Evie remembered Michael gripping her hand while fire reflected across the shattered fuselage. No, Reyes looked at her. That was not entirely true. Michael had been terrified. Evie had simply refused to let him face it alone. He asked about your mother, she said. Graham's eyes opened. And you? His breathing stopped. He said you two fought before he deployed. Graham's face collapsed. Nobody in the corridor knew that. Nobody except Michael. And apparently Evie. He told me to tell you something if I ever met you. Graham could barely speak. What? Evie looked directly at him. He said, tell Graham I knew he loved me. I was just too stubborn to say it back. The billionaire lowered his head. For the first time since entering Aldercrest, Graham Vale had no command to give. Reyes reached into his flight suit. He removed a worn photograph. 7 people stood beside a Black Hawk. At the center was a younger Evelyn Mercer. Captain's bars. Flight gear. A smile nobody at Aldercrest had ever seen. On the back, written in faded marker, was one word. Nightingale. Cross stared at it. That was your call sign? Reyes answered. It became more than that. Evie's eyes hardened. Daniel. But he continued. After the crash, she kept 6 men alive for nearly 4 hours with what survived in one medical bag. He looked around the corridor. 3 of us were told later we should have died. Graham stared at the woman he had called insubordinate. The nurse whose badge he had ordered taken. The woman who had saved his daughter less than an hour ago. and the woman who had once held his dying brother's hand. The operating room doors opened. Cross's colleague stepped out. "Mr. Vale?" Graham turned. "Your daughter is stable." His knees nearly failed him. Then he looked back at Evie, but she was already walking away. "Evelyn." She stopped. Graham Vale, a man whose name could move markets and hospital boards, struggled to find two simple words. Before he could say them, Reyes spoke behind him. "Mr. Vale." Graham turned. The pilot's expression was cold. "You wanted her fired." Graham said nothing. Reyes looked toward Evie. "Tomorrow, everyone in this hospital is going to know exactly who you tried to throw away." The next morning, nobody at Aldercrest called Evelyn Mercer, just a nurse. By 8:10, the story had traveled from the emergency department to surgery, from surgery to administration, and from administration to every floor where someone had watched Graham Vale order her fired. But Evie was not there to hear any of it. She sat alone on a bench outside Clare Vale's recovery room, wearing the same blood-stained scrubs. Her badge was still downstairs. Her job technically no longer existed, and she seemed perfectly comfortable with that. The elevator doors opened. Martin Keller stepped out carrying something in his hand. Evie recognized it immediately. Her badge. Behind him came Dr. Nathan Cross. Then Graham Vale. Major Daniel Reyes followed last. Keller stopped in front of her. "Evelyn." Evie looked up. "I owe you an apology." She said nothing. Keller held out the badge. "Your termination has been rescinded. Effective immediately." Evie looked at the badge but did not take it. Keller's hand slowly lowered. "What? You fired me because a donor demanded it." His face tightened. "We made a mistake." "No," Evie stood. "You made a choice." Cross looked away. The words were not cruel. That made them worse. "You chose money over clinical judgment. You chose authority